Thank you, Jill, and good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And for anyone that's new for today's talk, please just take what you like and leave the rest, and come back when Reverend BJ is in the pulpit. Several years ago, Reverend BJ gave a talk that included events in her life that inspired me to collect spirit stories from folks in our congregation. I'll retell one of her stories. Some of you may remember it. Reverend BJ was leaving her home where she had lived safely for many years. As she was pulling out of the driveway, she heard a voice loud and clear telling her that she needed to go back in, close her windows, or she would be robbed. She'd been leaving the windows open for years, and she chose to ignore the voice. About a mile down the road, she heard the voice again, telling her to close the windows or she'd be robbed. This time, she felt a little frightened, but again shook it off and went on to work. After her 8-hour workday, she drove back home, and guess what? She'd been robbed. Someone had slit the screen and burglarized her home. She knew she had received guidance that day, but didn't take notice until she was forced to learn a very expensive lesson. I have long been interested in these kinds of stories that I've heard over the years and that I also personally experienced. They express our connection with spirit. Throughout my life, I have had what I used to call serendipity or happy coincidences, but since finding unity, I realized that they are spirit manifesting in my life. BJ's talk resonated with me, and knowing that spirit moves in everyone's life, I thought it would be fun to collect these stories from our congregation and share them. Before I do share them, though, let's take a look at what Charles Fillmore, founder of Unity, has to say about spirit. He says in The Revealing Word that spirit is God as the moving force in the universe. I'll paraphrase more of what he said. He says that sometimes we have thoughts that come out of nowhere, that puzzle us as to their origins, and that we can pass off as daydreams. But we should pay attention to this unusual and usually faint whispering of spirit. Charles Fillmore talks about the spirit of truth, which is God's thought projecting into our minds ideas that will build a spiritual consciousness like that of Jesus. The spirit of truth watches every detail of our lives. And when we, by affirmation, proclaim its presence, it brings new life into our body and prosperity into our affairs. The phrase he uses, that God watches over every detail of our life, for me, gives meaning to some of the small delights that have happened to me and gives me an opportunity to say thank you. For instance, when I was in my 20s and poor, I found myself at the House of the Seven Gables, but did not have enough money for the entrance fee. I went back to my car and looked down in the parking lot, and there, rolled up on the ground, was the amount I needed to get in. A small detail, but it was spirit. We are all guided by divine law all of the time. But in our sense consciousness, we fall asleep and don't notice. As Unity Truth students, we can know better. The stories I have collected from people in our community are ones of manifestations, answered prayers, guidance, or healing. For time purposes, I have summarized them. I hope I have captured the essence of each story. The plan is to publish the originals in a pamphlet if I get a big enough collection, so please, if you are moved, send me more. Let me share some of these spirit stories with you now. Let's start with stories of manifestation. Dmitri Sinkel, my husband, shared one that took place in a cemetery a few years ago. He, I, and other family members were standing in front of his parents' headstone. We were commemorating the Day of the Dead, remembering all our loved ones that had passed on, speaking their names aloud, when suddenly, a loud whoosh, 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 whoosh sounded above us and to our right. We never saw anything, but continued our remarks. And then Dmitri said, "What was that?" It sounded like an owl joined our ceremony. His sister said, "Yeah, what was that?" And we all realized the experience was real, that we had been joined by another presence, and it was not a coincidence. We later did some research and discovered that owls have long been considered guardians of departed souls after their transition to the other side. This visitation and realization made us feel validated in our commemorative ceremony and comforted in our continued connection with our departed loved ones. Another story of manifestation was shared by Beth Blasey, a former member of this congregation. They moved away a few years ago. She tells of missing her mother after she passed away while Beth was still in high school. With every year, it seemed that she missed her more, especially after Beth had children of her own. After years passed, Beth, still missing her mother, was sitting at her computer on the anniversary of her mother's passing, when suddenly her printer switched on and began to print all on its own. She watched, spellbound, as the paper came forth with a tiny heart in the upper left-hand corner. And considering the date, Beth knew that it was an answer to her prayer, and she felt overjoyed and uplifted. Over the course of several months on significant dates, she got 13 more printouts. Beth can't explain what happened, but experienced these happenings as a connection with her mother and was comforted by them. Another type of spirit story people shared with me is what I call answered prayer. Linda Lloyd, a member of our congregation, told me one that involved a fire in her local community. The fire consumed an inn that housed troubled people, some with serious social issues. Linda was driving by when the fire happened and witnessed the troubled people forced out in the cold. Linda prayed that God would help her help these truly unfortunate souls, and this is what unfolded. The local priest, whose parish was next door, but who had previously been apprehensive about helping this particular population, agreed after Linda, who had prayed, spoke with him, and he opened the hall and allowed the people to come in. Linda again prayed for direction and was led to walk into town where there was a local veterans group at their meeting center. They were just finishing a meeting. They had leftover juice, snacks, and paper products and gave them to Linda to give to these newly homeless people. So Linda, through answered prayer, was able to find, at a moment's notice, shelter and food for people she didn't know who had great need for Spirit's help that night. Joellen Stone was in the third week of her 4T Prosperity class. She wanted to attend the Eastern Conference, but her finances were not favorable. Jane Richardson, a wise member of our community, advised Joellen to, quote, put it out to the universe, which she did. Later that week, Joellen received an unexpected check in the mail that was enough for her to attend the conference. Another story that combines answered prayer with manifestation is told by Jill Baldarelli. She was in the hospital with state-of-the-art medical equipment, awaiting the start of a serious medical test. The doctors were telling her that they were considering several different sites on her body to conduct the test, and Jill started to get scared. She said to herself, "God, I need a sign that you're with me right now." Whereupon all the power went out, including the backup system. As they were plunged into darkness, Jill had a vision of Reverend BJ and all her UCCM friends praying for her, and she was immediately calmed. The power came back on within 30 seconds, and the test